Hello. Welcome once again to MyDrash, and today we will talk about Parashat Vayakhel. Parashat Vayakhel and Pekudei are parallel in some sense to Parashat Truma and Tetzaveh. So Parashat Truma and Tetzaveh talked about the commands that Moshe got with regard to the Mishkan, of how to build it and how to anoint the Kohanim and the different artifacts that are used in the Mishkan. And Parashat Vayakhel and Pekudei, which are separated from Truma Tetzaveh with Kitisa, where we have the sin of the golden calf, Parashat Vayakhel Pekudei talk about the implementation of this command and how it was built in practice. And so, if you look at the commentary, you'll find a lot of discussion about the differences between the two descriptions. One is the theory, the ideal, the idea, and one is the practice. However, today we're going to talk a little bit about one aspect of that practice, which is the identity of the people that built the Mishkan. So, the Torah specifies very early on in the parsha that Bezal'el ben Uri ben Chur Lemate Yehuda, Bezal'el, the son of Uri, the son of Chur, from the tribe of Judah, is the one who's going to sort of oversee the entire project. And a lot of the Midrashim talk in the Tanchuma Midrash talk about two questions. One of them is, who was this person? Why was Bezal'el chosen? What was so great about his wisdom? Or did it have to do perhaps with his lineage? He was the grandson of Chur, and Chur was a person who, according to the Midrash, stood up to the people that were trying to build a golden calf. And the other aspect has to do with the type of wisdom that was required to build this thing, because the verses state, when they talk about, one second over here, when they talk about the issue of that was a bit of a sorry for that pause there. When the verses talk about who is the person who should build the Mishkan, what are the qualities that we expect of him, and what is God going to do to help him with it, it says the following. Here we go. וימלא אותו רוח אלוהים בחוכמה, בתבונה ובדעת, בכל מלאכה. So God will fill him up with wisdom. And then it says, etc. ועשה בצלאל ואוהליו, וכל איש חכם לב, אשר נתן השם חוכמה ותבונה בהמה, לדעת לעשות את כל מלאכת עבודת הקודש, לכל אשר ציווה השם. So we're told over here that Bezal'el and Eliyav and all people which have wisdom in their heart. And so we're told that they were wise, and that they needed also to be given special wisdom. God filled them with a spirit of wisdom in order to perform the act of building the Mishkan. Now, the need for special wisdom to build the Mishkan is an idea we see in many, many places. For example, we hear that Moshe didn't understand how to build the menorah, how to build the menorah in the Mishkan. So he had to be shown specifically how that should be done, and even so, he couldn't do it. And the truth is that if we think about what is so difficult about building the Mishkan, I think that we can understand for sure on a spiritual level what was difficult about it. The Mishkan, building the Mishkan, in one of the Tanchuma Midrashim in this parsha, is likened to the creation of the world, or specifically the wisdom that it was needed to create the world. God also felt that kind of wisdom was needed also to build the Mishkan, and later on the Mikdash, and also the Mikdash, the temple, in the future. And the connection between these two, the building of the Mishkan, of the Tabernacle, and the building of the world, the creation of the world, is that in both cases there's what's called tzimtzum, or somehow God limiting himself on some level. when God created the world, he limited himself in that he, until that point, from a mystical point of view, all there was God, and then God, filled up the entire existence, and then by making room for something else, he had to somehow take a step back. And in general, in order for God to interact with the world, he has to take a step back, because if he would expose us all to his, to his infinity, we would be completely swallowed up. And in a similar way, the Mishkan was a place for God to reside on some level, right? Of course, it's all, not that God was not everywhere else, but he was residing there on some level. And so again, to take God, this infinity, and compact him into such a small space, to put it in very simple terms, required some level of tzimtzum. And really we see, in fact, there are several places where we hear that there was some sort of a warping of the time-space, of the space continuum in the Mishkan. Not only were there miracles, but there was also seemed to be cases where you were told to put a box that was so big, that was like very big, or an artifact that was very big, into a space that couldn't hold it, and yet somehow it did. Some sort of a magical trick there, right? Like we see magicians do. But there really was that warping over there, and so it's the same kind of like wisdom of needing to somehow take the infinite and place it into the finite. And so we hear that need for special wisdom spilled over into a lot of the planning, and so God needed to infuse the people that constructed the Mishkan with a special kind of wisdom, in addition to the fact that they were already wise. So we have these two topics that the Midrash talks about in general over this parsha. One of them is the special wisdom and requirements that were needed for building on the Mishkan, and the other is who was Hur, why was he chosen? One of the Midrashim, who was Bezal'el, why was he chosen, and why was his name even mentioned in this regard? Like, well, why do we mention the contractor or the overseer that built the Mishkan? We're going to look today at one Midrash that somehow takes a little bit of both of these questions into account. So the Midrash says like this: so this is God saying, I'm going to fill up Bezal'el and anybody else that works. I'm going to fill up them with a godly spirit of wisdom. I'm going to choose people that already have wisdom and fill them with an extra boost. To teach you God only fills up, only teaches, and gives wisdom to he who already has some wisdom. Okay, that's what we learn from this. Matrona achat, one woman, just like we did last week, we had this, actually no, we didn't, ignore that part. There was a woman, sort of a matron, okay, matrona, a matron. Achat shalat Rabbi Yossi bar Chalafta. She asked Rabbi Yossi bar Chalafta, Ma'u shekatav yehev chokhmat lechakimin latipshim היה צריך לומר. What does it mean when it says in Daniel that God gives wisdom to the wise? It just said he gives wisdom to the fools. Amarla, he answered her, Biti, my daughter, im yavo etzlech shnayim. If two men come to you, one rich, one poor, vehem tzrichim lilvot mimech mamon, and they need to borrow some money, le'eze mehem ant malva. To who would you loan the money? Would you lend the money? Amar lo le'ashir. She said, I loan it to the rich man. Amar la vilama. And why would you do that? Why would you choose the rich over the poor? After all, the poor needs it more. Amar lo, she told him, she'im yachsar, yeh lo mamon she'ifra. Aval ani im yavin ma'otai me'echan ifra. She said, the rich man has a cushion. He has even if he loses what I loan him, he's probably borrowing it for business. But even if he loses that business venture, he'll still be able to pay me back with his own assets. Whereas the poor person won't be able to do that. So he told her, well, listen to what you're saying. Like the same thing applies to God. If God would have given wisdom to the fools, היו יושבים בבתי כיסאות ובמבואות מטונפות ובבתי מרחצאות They would just sit around in bars and in pubs and saunas, and they wouldn't deal with the Torah. They wouldn't not with the Torah, but with the wisdom. They wouldn't use it. Instead, God gave it to the wise who will sit in the yeshivas and in academia, and they'll learn, they'll use their wisdom, they'll apply it. Okay, so you filled up the one who already has it. That was the discussion there. So, if we look at that discussion, okay, so we have this woman who's trying to understand why God would give wisdom to the wise, not give it to the fools. And we have two questions to answer to deal with over here. Number one is, what was the argument between the two? And number two is, what was the parallel between the example that Rabbi Yossi gave with who would you loan money to the question of who should God give wisdom to? Let's start with the second question first. So, the connection isn't straightforward between those two. The analogy isn't straightforward. The woman says, "I want to get my money back." God doesn't say, "I want to get my wisdom back," right? So, what is the parallel? What is the connection between who you give wisdom to and who you give money to? I think it's pretty obvious that the connection is in terms of what is your expectation when you give this thing of worth, okay, this either money or wisdom. You want the end result to be something, and you only give it to somebody where that end result is ensured. When you loan somebody money, you expect to get it back. So you don't really care what that person does with the money. You just want to make sure that it gets returned to you eventually. And that's the thing you care about. That's what's going to guide your decision of who to loan the money to. When you give wisdom, when God gives wisdom, He wants it to be used. He wants that wisdom not to go to waste. He wants somebody to go ahead and use this gift that He gave them. Okay, so what God cares about is that you actually use the wisdom. And when a person gives money, they care that the money gets returned. Fine. And now we get to the second question. And this is the bigger issue over here. What is the argument between this matron and Rabbi Yossi Bar Chalafta? Well, what was their argument? If we look at her question, why don't you give wisdom to the fools or to the stupid people? It would seem that she's making almost a maybe a pragmatic and maybe even a socialist kind of claim. Saying something along the lines of, God gives wisdom to whoever He wants. If He's about to infuse this special wisdom, okay, some sort of give a special wisdom boost to somebody, and this is wisdom from God, so He can give, wisdom to anybody, right? And to whatever degree God decides to give, then He should give it to those who need it most, right? We should, even the playing field. We should give wisdom to the fools, wisdom to those who don't have wisdom. If that's the case, what is Rabbi Yossi's answer? He says to her, well, if God gave wisdom to the fools, they would just go and waste it. That's very, very strange, at least in first glance. Are you saying that people that are, don't have a high IQ, if you give them a high IQ, then there's something genetically flawed about them? There's something that they can't do, something inherent about the poor, that they're unable to rise above sort of where they are, or not the poor, but the people that are not blessed with high intelligence. Is that really what Rabbi Yossi Bar Chalafta was trying to say? I think that the answer to this lies in understanding what wisdom is. And here again, just like we talked about in Parashat Mishpatim this year, we're going to go back to that famous statement of Chazal about what wisdom really is. Chazal say in Masechet Avot, they say, Ezu Chacham Halomen Mikol Adam. Who is he that is wise? He that learns from any person that they come across. Now, when you think about that statement, the first, sort of like the first reaction you have to that, is that this statement is designed to give you sort of the 180 degrees perspective on what people think wisdom is. In other words, people usually think that what is wisdom? A person that knows so much that they don't need to learn anything else. That's the most wise person, and they can teach everybody else. And the Mishnah is telling you, no, true wisdom is in the fact that you learn from everybody else, not that you teach everybody else. Teaching may be a byproduct, but wisdom is learning from everybody around you. I think, and what I'm about to say now applies also to all these other two cases there, where they talk about who is a hero, a person who controls himself, and who is rich, a person who does enough on his own. I think what we're about to say now about wisdom would apply to those two as well. Another thing that the Midrash is that Masechet Avot section is trying to tell you is that if you're wise or not is up to you. It's a very counterintuitive thing. We usually think about wisdom as being a byproduct of intelligence. A person has a high IQ, so they can study a lot, they can become geniuses in whatever field they choose to go at, and that's how they become wise, meaning that you have some sort of a basic intelligence, maybe even more than average intelligence, which lets you become wise. But when you say to somebody, the true wise one and true wisdom is in learning from anybody you come across. You can be the most stupidest person in the world, and still, I'm not talking about people that of course have certain physical or mental illness, but I'm saying in principle the 99% of the people, or any other high percentage you choose to define as normal, even if they're not the most intelligent, they can be wise. That's what the Mishnah is saying. They can be wise because they can learn from anybody around them, and so wisdom is up to them. And we're not used to thinking about that. We're not used to thinking about wisdom as being something that we can choose. We can perhaps appreciate it, but to choose to be wise, that's a big chedesh there. And it's the same about that the person who's rich is a person who's happy with what they have, and the person who's a hero is a person who can control himself. These are all things that you can do on your own, and that anybody can do on their own, at least in principle. And so, if we take that perspective on wisdom, we can now understand what Rabbi Yossi is trying to say. Why is it that when we give wisdom to the fools, they would waste it? Because who is a fool and who is a wise man? A wise man is really a person who's always looking to learn, who's always looking to advance what they understand and become, and add something to what they know. A person like that, when they get more wisdom, knows what to do with it. They know where to apply it. They know how to appreciate it. They'll look at it as a treasure. But a person who, because they felt they weren't worthy enough, because they weren't willing to try to apply themselves to do whatever they could. Maybe they can't do that much, but they wouldn't even do what they could. You give a person like that wisdom, give them wisdom, they won't know what to do with it. It will be there. They'll have this amazing treasure trove, like sort of now stored away in their mind somewhere, but they won't be able to make use of it, not in any seriously effective way. And this is because that's not how they think. That's not how they train their way of thinking. That's not how they've grown to see the world. And so Rabbi Yossi says, you know something? When God gives wisdom, He gives it to those who are wise already. Not wise as in they know everything. If they knew everything, God wouldn't need to give them wisdom. But He's saying to the Chachamim, to those who are Chacham, like we say in Masechet Avot, who always strive to learn. These people will know how to appreciate and use that wisdom. So to conclude, we talked about the fact that the wisdom that was needed for the Mishkan was a special kind of wisdom, an extremely spiritual, high level, beyond our sort of basic moral understanding kind of wisdom that was given to these people and to Bezal'el and to the rest of the people. And the discussion between the matron and Rabbi Yossi Vayakhel was there to emphasize that by people that were wise, we mean people which are, let's say, curious, that are intellectually interested, in everything that's around them and try to absorb all of creation, all that God put there, people like that, they create a vessel that is worthy of accepting God's wisdom. I'll end up with a small anecdote, which is a famous saying by, I believe, by von Neumann, who, but I may be wrong here about the association, who was once asked, why do we need all these scientists and all these experiments and the scientific method and rigorous analysis and all that stuff? After all, most true epiphanies in science, most true discoveries, were all by mistake. Somebody by mistake mixed two things together or left the X-ray machine on or something like that, and suddenly something happened and they were like, oh wow, this is amazing. Why do we need all this training and rigor, and it never really leads to the thing you think it's going to lead. You always, researchers go in a linear path. Great discoveries were discovered not by linear paths, but by non-linear approaches, things that were flukes and just like things that just seem to come by some weird intuition. And so he answered them, and I believe this is the phrasing, that chance favors the prepared mind. In other words, a person who works hard all the time to think in a linear way, to build up arguments, to build up a theory, test that theory, apply it, etc. When the strange thing happens, when the small occurrence that's off where it's supposed to be happens, they notice it and they can take it up, and that's how they can grab hold of that and derive of that the great discoveries. These these small sort of twists and insights that suddenly come out of nowhere. A person who didn't go all through all that rigor wouldn't also know how to grab hold and wouldn't even notice maybe that event that was not supposed to be there. And I think that same idea is what we talked about today, and that is that it's never a waste to go and apply yourself, never a waste to go and try. Maybe you won't get to the highest rank, maybe you won't be the next Nobel Prize winner, but everything that you do, if you're trying to do it sincerely, will eventually have a positive impact on you and help you grow. And a person like that is a person who is worthy of receiving more of God's of God-given wisdom. So, Shabbat Shalom.